Congratulations, San Francisco. You've ruined pizza. First the Hawaiians, and now you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 28 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about what to do if you lock yourself in your trunk. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you so much for joining me today. I was sitting down thinking about what should I talk about today, and tomorrow I am going to go see Joker, the new movie starring Joaquin Phoenix, the story about how the Joker became the Joker, one of many stories of how the Joker became the Joker, and so I thought it was a good opportunity to sit down and talk about some of my favorite movie villains. So what I've done as usual is I've made a top 5 list. I don't have an honorable mentions today. It's just 5 movie villains that I'm going to talk about. Some are, like, they're all pretty standard, I guess. Like, when you talk to people about movie villains, they bring up kind of the same ones again and again. And this list, it's like I picked a couple that are maybe not quite like top tier, but like when you get to like number 1 and 2, you're gonna be like, well, of course. And like that's for a reason. These are very iconic roles, they're portrayed very well, and they're just really good bad guys. And that's an interesting question. Like what makes a good bad guy? Is it how smart their plan is, or how well they're performed, or how they work as a foil against the hero? Like there's all kinds of different factors coming in together. How memorable they are is another one. So there's so many different things coming together to create a good movie villain. So taking those things into consideration, I've made my top 5 list here. I'll break down exactly why I chose those villains over other ones and kind of why they're ranked the way they are. And that's going to be the whole episode today. Just me talking about movie bad guys. And then next week, after I've seen Joker, I'm going to come back, think about that movie, and I'm going to talk about it. And I'm very excited to see it. And I'm also very excited to review it on the podcast next week. So stay tuned for that one. But without further ado, why don't I just get started into my list? So my first one, my number 5 movie villain, that's actually, he's probably the newest. Not probably. He is the newest out of all the movie villains on this list here, and that's going to be Thanos. So, if you see movies at all, you are aware of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and since 2012, Marvel has been teasing the coming of Thanos, and he showed up at the end of the first Avengers, and he showed up in Guardians of the Galaxy, and he showed up at the end of Age of Ultron, and they just kept building and building and building, and with that kind of fanfare and that kind of, hype building, how can your villain live up to that? And I think that Josh Brolin's performance as Thanos really holds up, especially in Infinity War. In Endgame, I don't think he's as strong in Endgame as he is in Infinity War, so I'm going to primarily talk about his role in that film. Especially because when you look back at Infinity War, it really is Thanos focused. There's a lot of things going on with his character, and he has a lot of screen time. And I think that when it comes from Anthony and Joe Russo, the director's perspective, that's really, like, when you have so many heroes, who do you choose to focus on? Well, there's only one villain. Focus on him instead of all of the heroes. And so I think because we get that point of view, and we really get to spend time with Thanos, find out who he is as a character, find out what his motivations are, what his plan is, that by the end of the movie, by the time the snap happens, we are like not on his side, but we understand where he's coming from. And absolutely, he could have used the Infinity Gauntlet to just make more resources for the people, but he's kind of unhinged. He's a little bit psychotic, so his solution is to kill half the people instead of doubling our resources, which is something that the Gauntlet could definitely do. He also has some pretty good monologues in the movie when he talks about fate and destiny, or in Endgame when he talks about how he is inevitable. All these different things. He has a lot of really good, memorable lines, and I think that is something that really speaks to a good villain is just how memorable they are. I think his character design, and I think that's consistent with all of the villains here on my list, is just how they look and how they feel are very strong, and just their presence. Thanos has such a presence. When he shows up at the beginning of Infinity War and they're on the ship and they just killed half of the Asgardians, and he's not really doing anything, he's just standing there while Ebony Maw is talking. You just feel him there. And it goes the same with some of the other Marvel movies. Like in Guardians of the Galaxy, Thanos isn't in it a lot, but you can feel his presence, and he has just this grandeur to him. And it's not just because he's really big, it's just because he's such a determined individual, and he's so serious, and he has this look on his face of like every single thing that goes into his day he thinks about, and he doesn't do anything that doesn't mean something. So I think Thanos is a really great movie villain, and that is why he is my number 5. I'm going to move on to number 4, and that is going to be Hannibal Lecter. Now, if you don't know who Hannibal Lecter is, he first appeared in the movie The Silence of the Lambs, which came out in 1991, and he's portrayed by Anthony Hopkins. Now, he was actually so good in this movie that he won an Academy Award for his performance. The combination of Anthony Hopkins' performance paired with the writing of the character and just who this character is really what makes Hannibal Lecter memorable. Now, he is a doctor, he's a psychiatrist, so he knows how to get into people's heads. He's infinitely brilliant. He's just such a smart guy, but he's imprisoned. Like the whole movie, pretty much, he is a captive, but he's helping Jodie Foster's character, Clarice, solve a crime, and he knows who the criminal is, so he's in his head and he's in Clarice's head. But he's also a cannibal. He likes to eat people. And when he frees himself, because he is just smart enough to do so, it's terrifying. Like, I think of all the villains on the list, Hannibal Lecter is just straight up terrifying, and the rest are just really good characters. Like, if I were to meet any of these villains on the street, I'm sure I would probably die, but Hannibal Lecter is the one I would be terrified of, and I would be running from him, just because like he's so creepy, and he has this he has a presence, but not in the same way that Thanos does. When Thanos is in a room, the characters like defer to him because he has this almost authoritative aura to him. But when Hannibal Lecter's in the room, he has a presence that like you're just like your skin is crawling, and you just don't want anything to do with this guy. You don't want to be around him at all. So Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter is, oh boy. And it wasn't just that movie. There were a bunch of spin-offs, and then there was the TV show Hannibal, where Mads Mikkelsen played Hannibal Lecter. What were the other movies? There was Red Dragon. There was Hannibal Rising. Is that what it was called? It was like a Hannibal Lecter origin story movie. I don't remember. There's a lot of movies that have Hannibal Lecter, but I think Silence of the Lambs is for sure the best one. It's the original. It's the movie that kind of started like those edgy, dark movies of the 1990s, like movies like Seven or Fight Club and Blade and a bunch of other kind of like edgy, dark movies. I think that it was The Silence of the Lambs that kind of started off that trend, and it's really just a strong film. I rewatched it just earlier this year. It's a really excellent film. It won Best Picture at the Academy Awards in 1991. If you haven't seen it, check it out, but I will warn you, it is very dark, it's very twisted, and if you don't have a good constitution for those sort of things, especially with one of the characters being a cannibal, it can be really off-putting, and this movie's not for everyone. It's really not. So I recommend it with that caveat of knowing going into the movie that it's gonna be dark, and you're not watching this movie to be entertained. It's a piece of art is what it is, but it's very, very dark. So that's my number 4, Hannibal Lecter. I'm going to move on to number 3. And my number 3 pick is a little bit interesting because he's not the main villain of the movie, and he just kind of shows up here and there, but he's very villainous. So maybe not like the villain, but certainly villainous. And that's going to be Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. And also he's in The Hobbit, but he's not in that very much. So we're going to stick to The Lord of the Rings. Now, he is portrayed by Andy Serkis, and he kind of shows up in the first movie, in The Fellowship of the Ring. Not for very long, and he doesn't even really have any lines. But he shows up in full force in The Two Towers. And I think that The Two Towers is where we really get to know who Gollum is. And he is also a very creepy character. Like, just looking at him, he's just like, he's got that grayish skin. He's got like almost no hair. He doesn't have very many teeth. He is just like crawling around in a loincloth. He's just unnerving to look at. And he talks to himself is a whole nother thing, and he has this dual personalities. He's got Gollum and he's got Smeagol. Smeagol is kind of like kinder and nicer, but Gollum, he's the mean one, and you don't want to mess with Gollum. Now, their interactions, not only between Gollum and Frodo and Sam, but the interactions between Gollum and Smeagol are really, really fascinating, and I think the divisive nature of this character is really what makes him fascinating. Especially, there's one scene in particular in The Two Towers where the camera pans as Gollum talks, and by the time it gets to the other side, it switches to Smeagol, and his eyes change a little bit, and Andy Serkis changes his facial features just slightly. So when it cuts back and forth from these two different angles, even though you're looking at the same body, you can see where the different personalities are switching back and forth and which is taking over the body at that time, and having a conversation with himself between two people within one person. And it's just a brilliant scene, and it shows that even though Gollum is very villainous, the good side can win out. In the end, he doesn't. And that's just even more heartbreaking, that the corruption of the ring has just tortured Gollum's soul so badly that even though there's just like a shred of hope that he could come back to the light and be a good person, it slips away, and there's no salvation for Gollum. And it's not just that he's a really interesting character and he's not really the main villain. I think Gollum also leaves his mark because he actually has a pretty big role to play with the heroes, and he's actually with our main character Frodo for a very long time. Like, normally the heroes and villains, they're against each other, but they're not in the same room a whole lot. They're just like two forces battling out, and they don't have a lot of screen time together. But Gollum, Frodo, and Sam are constantly together, and they're traveling together. So I think that's a really unique look at a villainous character that we don't really get in a whole lot of other movies. And so because we have these two good characters, and then Gollum interacting and learning about each other and developing as characters, we really get to see just what kind of person Gollum is, what kind of person Smeagol is, and how he can use his corruption to corrupt others, especially when we get into the Return of the King, and Gollum is really like kind of coaxing Frodo away from Sam, and he causes that rift between them. And that's not something that happens in the book, I think. I think that's something that just happens in the movies, The Lord of the Rings. So I think that's a really good addition to the character, to just see just how conniving and evil he is that these two best friends, Frodo and Sam, that Gollum just puts a wedge in between them and is in complete control of the situation to get exactly what he wants. And what does he want? He wants the ring. And that's all he wants. He wants his precious. That's it for Gollum, I think. Now I'm going to move on to number 2, which I think my number 2 is a lot of people's number 1, and it's the reason that I'm talking about this topic today, and that's going to be the Joker. Now, specifically, I'm talking about Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight back in 2008. Now, most people have seen this movie, so I think it's safe to say that when it comes to The Dark Knight, I feel that Heath Ledger carries this movie, and if he weren't in it, I feel like it would have been like just a regular cop drama, and it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting without this character. And Heath Ledger is really to be commended for his performance in this film. He did win the Academy Award posthumously. He did die before the Academy Awards, so I think it was his daughter who accepted the award for him at the ceremony, although I don't remember for sure. But it was an absolutely outstanding performance and just deserves to be commended. There's a lot of really good memorable lines from the Joker in this movie. He's also another character who just has this presence and just demands the screen whenever he's in a scene. And this is another guy who isn't around the hero a lot, but that scene with the Joker and Batman in the interrogation room might be the best scene of the whole movie, just because them playing off of each other and the Joker just being in complete control of the situation and being an anarchist and doing whatever he does. I think that is just a brilliant scene. It's played out really well. It's shot really well. It's another character whose character design is just flawless. And like his makeup and stuff gets more and more chaotic as the movie progresses, and I think that is just a testament to how well thought out everything went into making this movie. Obviously, you have things like Let's Put a Smile on That Face, and he tells the story of how he got his scars. He tells two different stories of how he got his scars, and then he's about to tell Batman a third story at the very end of the movie, but then Batman shoots those things at his face and throws him out off the side of the building. And that's another interesting thing, is that Heath Ledger's Joker actually doesn't die. He's imprisoned. So I think there was probably plans to bring him back into The Dark Knight Rises. But then, of course, after Heath Ledger passed away, I'm sure that whatever plans there were scrapped, because it's the kind of role that really only he could play, especially like it's just such an outstanding performance. It might be one of my favorite performances of all time. I really like when an actor gets something really unique and interesting that they can dive deep into, especially villainous characters. When you get just characters who are mean and you just get to do that, right? Heath Ledger is a great example. Another really good example of just a mean character who's acted really well is Allison Janney in I, Tonya. She plays Tanya's mom. Can't remember her name, but oh my goodness, she is the star of that movie. It's a really good performance. If you haven't seen I, Tonya, you should also check that out. If you haven't seen The Dark Knight, what are you even doing? Just sit down and watch it. It's a pretty good movie. It's I feel The Dark Knight is a little bit too long, probably about 20 minutes too long, but that's just me, and a lot of people probably disagree with me, and that's fine. You're allowed to have your own opinions, because movies are subjective, and that's just how it works. Do I have anything else to say about the Joker? That's a great question. Let's think. We've got, a little bit earlier, I had mentioned that Heath Ledger could only play this Joker in this way, and that's, I think, why Jared Leto's Joker was received so negatively, because I think a lot of people just really fell in love with Heath Ledger's performance and just couldn't break that away. And I think because of having Jared Leto in between Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix, I think that's gonna warm a lot of people up to the idea that this new Joker is kind of like setting things right. If you didn't like Heath Ledger's Joker, if you didn't like Jared Leto's Joker, then you don't have to watch it. Don't worry about it. I don't think Jared Leto's Joker was awful. It's certainly a different take on the character, but I don't think that he's the worst part of that movie. Suicide Squad has a lot of issues. I don't like that movie at all. It's really horrible, but I don't think that it's because of the Joker. It's because of a whole lot of other reasons. Maybe one day I'll have a whole episode just about how bad Suicide Squad is. But it's not going to be today because I have other things to talk about. We're talking about movie villains. So number 2 is the Joker. Why don't I move on to my number 1? And here we are. He's the biggest, he's the baddest, he's iconic in every sense of the word. My number 1 villain in any movie is obviously Darth Vader. Now, Darth Vader is voiced by James Earl Jones, who also voices Mufasa in The Lion King, in both Lion King movies, actually. So if you've seen the new one or if you've seen the old one, it's the same guy. It's Darth Vader. And this character is just menacing. His character design is also just, like, has a presence to him. He's really tall. And just, like, he has his own theme music, which is amazing. It's really powerful music. And just, like, the tragedy of his character, from Anakin Skywalker to being seduced by the dark side to being burned alive by, like, his mentor and friend, to losing the love of his life and his children, and then, like, killing off all the Jedi and just embracing the dark side, but always being divided and having this conflict. I do believe that George Lucas said at one point that episodes 1 to 6 are really just the tragedy of Darth Vader, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Just, like, it makes sense in retrospect. Like, when George Lucas made episode 4, New Hope, back in 1977, that was not his intent, and it just ended up being that because people responded to the character so well. And then when he tied his backstory into Luke and Leia, which was not written originally, so all of those people who are like, oh, I knew that he was Luke's father the whole time because this and this, you didn't, because George Lucas didn't know he was Luke's father at the time. So if the guy who made the movies didn't know, then you didn't know. So don't even give me this. I knew that it was there. It's one of the biggest plot twists in movies of all time. And if I just ruined that for you, I'm sorry. The Empire Strikes Back came in 1980. So if you haven't seen it, or if you don't know about that, that's not my fault. I'm sorry. But anyway, Darth Vader, when we see him in episodes 4, 5, and 6, he's getting a little bit older. He's getting to the end of his life, and he's starting to realize the mistakes he's made, and he's starting to regret things. And then when his son comes back into his life, he just has that conflict even more. Is he loyal to the Emperor and the Empire, or is he more loyal to his family and to his son? And it's even interesting that, like, Darth Vader craves that power, even in confronting his son. He said, like, hey, why don't I kill the Emperor and we can rule the galaxy as father and son? And Luke shouts no a bunch of times and jumps off the balcony, and he falls down, and then we lead into the next movie. So Darth Vader is just so iconic at this point that even if you haven't seen the movies, you know who he is, you know what his breathing sounds like, you know, I am your father. Everyone likes to say, Luke, I am your father, but that's not the line. He says, no, I am your father. But that's beside the point. He's just, in every sense of the word, an iconic and memorable character. He's got an awesome cape. He has a lightsaber. It's just, everything about him is just designed to be memorable and designed to be villainous and designed to stay with you even after you're done watching the movie. So that's going to be pretty much it here then. I think that's all I've got to say about my movie villains. I'll just run them through one more time. Number 5 was Thanos. Number 4, Hannibal Lecter. number 3 Gollum, number 2 the Joker, and number 1 was Darth Vader. I would love to know what your favorite movie villain is. If it's the Joker or someone I didn't mention on this list, feel free to reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at PoddleNathan and on Instagram at Poddle Productions. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Next week, I'm going to be talking about Joker, the new movie with Joaquin Phoenix. And if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.